And in the experience of the Transfiguration.
Yes. In the liturgical text and in the patristic exegesis, Moses and Elijah are understood very obviously as the representatives of the Old Covenant. And therefore, they are seen as present on behalf of the old Israel, of the Old Testament, as confirming the true reality of Christ. So they are there as witnesses and as persons to confirm the mystery from the Old Covenant. That's the first thing that is stressed. Secondly, Moses represents the law, Elijah represents prophecy, the two main threads in the Old Testament. That is underlined. Thirdly, Moses represents the dead, because he died even though nobody knows where his tomb is. Elijah represents the living, because he did not die. He was carried still alive in a chariot up to heaven. So the presence of Moses and Elijah makes it clear that Christ, and this is what the liturgical texts say repeatedly, is Lord of the living and the dead. So those, I think, would be the themes that are worked in with reference to Moses and Elijah.
Yeah. I wonder if you could elaborate on the importance of the distinction between the essence and energies, and the importance of that, the void of that in the West. 30 words or less. 30 words or less. But is that void felt today among the Western churches in the real way, practical way? And how? And I would, this. I would think this is something tied into our discussion today.
Yes. Yes. First, what is the meaning of the distinction? The distinction in unity between essence and energies. This means, first of all, that God is mystery beyond our understanding. We do not know the divine essence. We never shall. In the age to come, it will still remain mystery. The gap between humans and the uncreated God is bridged by God's love. But nonetheless, there is the ontological gap between the Creator and the creature. We shall never know God in the way that God knows himself. And that's not any deprivation. It's simply a way of stating that God is God and we are men. So the statement that the essence is eternally unknowable, not only to humans but to angels, and that we cannot participate in the divine essence. This is a way of insisting upon the transcendence of God to all eternity. But then the energies emphasizes the other aspect of the truth. God is not distant from us. God is not the eternal clockmaker who sets the machinery working and then sits back. God is at the heart of everything. The doctrine of creation means that nothing would exist for a single second if it were not supported by the presence within it of the uncreated energies of God. The whole creation is a burning bush, permeated by God's uncreated energies. God is nearer to us than our own heart. God is at the heart of everything. So the transcendent God is also immanent and present everywhere. The distinction between creator and creation remains, but God is always near to us. We are to think of God in intensely dynamic terms. God is the life of everything around us. Not pantheism, that's not a Christian option, but panentheism. God is present in everything. That's how I understand the essence-energy distinction.
Just one more.
Well, perhaps I should answer the second half of his question. What about the West? At various times in the West, there has been the attitude that Palimism is a doctrinal deviation and is false. That, however, is not a position to which the Church of Rome is firmly committed. And there are many Roman Catholics who would say that they regard the Palamite teaching as perfectly correct, and they do not see it as fundamentally inconsistent with Thomism. Thomism is working with a different set of criteria, and within the Thomist context, an Aristotelian Thomist approach, the Palamite essence-energies distinction does not work. But the Catholic Church in the West has never committed itself to Thomism as the only possible expression of the Christian faith. Therefore, particularly in the last 20 years, many Catholics have begun to speak of Gregory Palamas as a saint. A crucial point came when, in the 1960s, at Rome, they were reprinting the Greek service books for the Eastern Catholics. Until the 1960s, Gregory Palamas had never appeared in the Greek service books printed at Rome. Instead of the service for Gregory Palamas on the second Sunday in Lent, they had a quite different service concerning the holy relics. I don't know where that service comes from, but it's there. And all in Greek, and it's probably from the Byzantine period. Now, when they began to reprint the service books at the time of the Second Vatican Council, the question was raised, what were they going to do about Gregory Palamas? And in fact, they were reprinting the service books in an anthologion, a kind of equivalent to the Roman breviary, in 4 volumes. And the first volume came out. The second volume should have been the Triodion, with or without Gregory Palamas. But that didn't come out. And then the third and fourth volumes came out. And I wondered what's happened to the second volume. So I asked my friends at Rome, and they said, we don't know what to do about Gregory Palamas. Because some of us say you can't include him, his teaching is untrue, and then others say, no, he should be included. And eventually they consulted a learned Jesuit, Father Irénée Auxerre, who actually has written in his youth in a rather sarcastic way about the Orthodox, but in his later life he became much more positive. And he said, he was an old man by this time, blind, he said, of course you must include it. There is no other possibility. Put it in. So they did. And it's printed actually in an appendix. The service for the relics is still there in the main part, but then there's a parartima, an appendix, where the service of St. Gregory Palamas is included. Now, a service book is not a book for study. It's not a collection of useful documents that you might be interested to read. Service book is for prayer. And if you print something in a service book, you mean it. And that would apply to Catholics as well as to Orthodox. So if they include Gregory Palamas in that service book, that means he is for them a saint, and they do not reject his teaching. They see his teaching at least as a theologumenon, a legitimate expression of the faith, even though they may not see it as dogma. So I would say that the West need not exclude or condemn Palamas. Palamism was not discussed at the Council of Florence in 1438 to 39, so there was no condemnation of Palamism made. And in fact, many of the early Latin fathers speak in terms which are very close to that of Palamas. St. Benedict, for example, had a vision of the divine light where he saw the whole creation contained in a single ray of light from the moon one night. And Palamas refers to this and says this was truly a vision of the uncreated light. So that's just one example of a vision in the West which can be very easily understood in Palamite terms. So I think whatever our difficulties are with the West, this need not actually be a central one.
In a lot of the stuff, too.
Oh, yes. Yes. Yes,
Yes.
that's right. We can find the theme of the divine light quite commonly in Western sources, and it isn't always explicated fully, but the tradition is there. So I think there isn't, in the end, any irrevocable division between East and West here. But if you talk with strict Thomists, they won't be so happy.
We cover the Jews, and we cover the Muslims through comments, or the Hindus in the total picture of humanity.
When we were at lunch, Father, you asked me a question, how many miles is Oxford from London? And I was so pleased to have a question that could be answered clearly and completely in a single sentence.
Shame on
You've disappointed me now. Yes. Hinduism, I'm no expert in Hinduism, but in yoga, at a certain point, the adept experiences a vision of light during the use of his exercises. This is mentioned in many of the yogic texts. The question arises, what is this light which they see? I don't think this is just fantasy. They do see a light. If we turn to texts in the Philokalia, you find references to the divine and uncreated light, but you also find references to the light of the intellect, the light of the nous. Evagrius of Pontus especially refers to this. Now, this is not the same as the divine light, the light of Tabor. This is a created light of the intellect, an experience of oneself as totally luminous, but not on the level of permeation by the divine energies, but on the level of experiencing one's own true nature. There is an experience of light which is a natural and created light of the intellect. And this is not to be confused with the uncreated light of Tabor. Now, I would think that possibly what the yogis are experiencing is this created light of the intellect. Whether there is within Hinduism any understanding of a divine and uncreated light, I'm not sure, but I doubt it. In Sufism, within the Islamic tradition, there are many close parallels with Byzantine mystical teaching. And very probably there was contact and interaction. St. Gregory Palamas himself, when he was Archbishop of Thessalonica, traveling from his see to the capital, Constantinople, was captured by the Turks, and he remained in captivity for some 15 months before he was ransomed. And we know that while he was in captivity, he had discussions with the local mullahs, the local Islamic teachers. And we have accounts of some of their discussions. Now, actually, they don't discuss ways of prayer. They don't discuss the divine light. They're much more interested in discussing the status of Jesus Christ. But it's not impossible that, if not Palamas, at least other Christians who met with Islamic teachers did discuss their different ways of prayer and the different experiences they had of the divine presence. So I suspect that there could well be interaction between the Sufis, who of all the currents in Islam are the ones most open to Christianity. Indeed, the strict Islamic fundamentalists have always suspected the Sufis of being secret Christians. I think there could well have been contacts and interaction there. The psychosomatic technique used by the Byzantine Hesychasts has striking parallels with the methods used by the Sufis. And while I think it very unlikely that the Byzantines knew what was going on in India with the yogis, though it's not impossible, the parallels with Sufism are far closer, and the possibility of contact is much closer. The Sufis were certainly, the early Sufis, influenced by the writings of St. Isaac the Syrian, whom we know that they read. So there could be certain interaction there and certain parallels, but I've not explored them.
As His Grace came into the session, I asked him how his energy was, and he said ebbing. And I don't think his energy is uncreated, so I think we do need to break at this point. But with great thanks indeed. I'm glad you went for a walk in 1952. Thank you very much.
Some of the best 24 hours.
Indeed, indeed.
Well, thank you for your questions. I felt quite stretched by your inquiries, and they've started off in my mind different other lines that would be well worth exploring.
Master, may we have your blessing?
Yes.